Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Biznology Digital Marketing Webinar. I'm Frank Reed. I'm one of the bloggers here at Biznology. I'm also the managing editor for the Marketing Pilgrim blog, and we're currently number 10 on the Ad Age Power 150, so be sure to come by and check us out. I also consult with small and medium businesses in the SMB market about effective online marketing through my business, which is called Local Basics. That's Local B-A-S-I-X. Today you're going to be hearing, though, from Mike Moran, and Mike is the managing editor of the Biznology blog, and he'll present Tracking Social Media ROI. As we're waiting for more attendees to join, let me review the format of our webinar so everybody's familiar. Our Biznology webinars, they last just about 30 minutes, so you can easily fit them into your busy schedule. That's part of how they're designed. We record each webinar, and we'll email you that link later on this week. During the speaker's presentation, you can use your GoToWebinar controls to ask a question. That arrow, the orange arrow, opens and closes your webinar controls. If you have a question, simply type it into the box labeled questions at any time during the event and press the send button. And then I will select a few questions at the end of the webinar and pose them to Mike. Please feel free to ask any questions, because the more we hear from you, the better it is for everybody. And while we're waiting for the last few attendees to join, I'd like to remind you that the Biznology newsletter and blog is available for free, and that's at mikemoran.com. That's MikeMoran.com. So if you're not already a subscriber, we hope that you'll sign up now. So thanks again for all of you, for spending the next 30 minutes with us. We really do appreciate it, because we know how valuable your time is. So let's introduce today's speaker. Mike Moran is the managing editor of Biznology blog and a well-known expert in all things digital marketing. He's co-author of Search Engine Marketing, Inc., and the sole author of Do It Wrong Quickly. Mike's a veteran of IBM, managing groups at IBM.com for 8 years, and then retiring from IBM in 2005 as a distinguished engineer. Mike has a thriving private consulting practice, and he also serves as chief strategist at Conversion, a leading digital marketing agency. So if you've ever struggled with how to know the value of your social media marketing, or how to tell if your social media activities are even working, this is the webinar for you. So Mike, take it away.
Thanks, Frank. So one of the things that I hear all the time is people asking if it's even possible to track social media ROI. And I'm here to tell you that it is. But it's not something that you can do regardless of how you're using social media. So you can't expect more of social media than you expect of the same kinds of techniques that you use offline. So for example, suppose you're using social media for public relations. And you might ask yourself, well, how can I track the return on investment for social media for public relations? Well, it's kind of a weird question, because how do you track ROI for public relations that are done offline? You probably don't. And so there's nothing magical about social media or about any kind of online marketing that makes ROI suddenly easy to track. If you're doing something that makes sense to track return on investment, then you can do it with social media. But if you're using social media for something for which you wouldn't track return on investment offline, it doesn't make any sense that you would try to do it online. So, but sometimes we apply higher standards for the new thing. So we've been doing public relations for 70 years, and we never ask the question of whether there's a return on investment. We just believe that it's a good idea to do. But suddenly when we want to apply social media to public relations, now we want to see what the return on investment is, where we would never ask that question about public relations offline. And so what we need to think about is make sure that the thing you're trying to do return on investment for with social media is something that actually makes sense to track return on investment for. It's something that you can track return on investment for offline. And so what we're going to focus on in this webinar is how to measure the return on investment for social media when applied to marketing, in this case, direct marketing. And so what we start out by doing is asking ourselves, what are the things that you're trying to do in social media that make sense from a direct marketing point of view? So can you reach out to your communities? So Can you send messages to people who like your Facebook fan page if you have a brand with a fan page? One of the things we did for this webinar is to invite Facebook friends and LinkedIn connections to the events and to tweet our announcement of this event. So those are things that we were able to do to reach out to a social media community, and we know exactly how we're going to measure the results of that. We're going to measure it by how many people have signed up for the event and how many people attend the event. And so if you can think about using social media the same way you would use direct mail, for example. So people who are sending out catalogs or letters to people where they're trying to judge the response, you can use the social media communities as an analog to your mailing list. So you know how important it is to have an email mailing list, or how important it is to have a snail mail mailing list. And that is an asset that you use where you're deciding how often are you going to contact people, what are you trying to get them to do, and all those things are perfect ways to use social media as well. So one way of using social media that is a direct analog to direct marketing is to reach out to the community. So reach out to all the people that are Facebook friends, Twitter followers, LinkedIn connections. All of these things make a lot of sense in social media, just as they do in other kinds of direct marketing. Another way to use social media that's maybe different from traditional direct marketing is how do you respond to opportunities that come up in conversations. So in order to do that, you need to have some method of listening to what the conversations are that are going on among your customers. Could be about your brand, could be about your competitors, could be about the kinds of problems that your products and services solve. And so if you have a way of listening to those conversations, then you can turn a conversation into a lead or another kind of opportunity. But you have to understand what you're listening for, because no two companies are listening for the exact same thing. So I have some examples here. So if you're a car dealer, a conversation you might want to listen to is when someone says, I need a new car, but I can only afford a used one. That might be an opportunity for you to come into that conversation and say, you could lease, or we have loans that we provide for even people whose credit might not be the best, or there are ways of helping people understand how they can solve that problem. So I gave another example from a web hosting company that says, can anyone tell me why a large website needs cloud computing? Well, here's an opportunity, if that's what you do as a company, to explain what the benefits are. If you work for a bank and someone asks, is this the right time to refinance a mortgage? That is a conversation where you can come in and answer that question. Now, you don't want to answer that question by coming in and doing a hard sell. You don't want to answer the question by being that annoying salesperson that won't leave people alone. People don't like that online any more than they like it offline. In fact, there's some evidence that they like it even less online. But if you really focus on what the person's problem is and you're helpful to them, at a certain point it might make sense for you to turn the conversation into more of a sales opportunity where you can say, you know, I hope that answered your question. Would you be interested in getting even more information about what we do? And they can say yes or no to that. So think about how you use social media. And no matter which way you use it, whether it's to reach out to communities or whether it's to get involved in conversations, direct marketing has to be the thing that you're focused on, and you have to figure out how you're going to drive people to your website, because that's where almost all the sales take place. Yes, it's possible for you to sell somebody something by engaging with them on Facebook and moving them to a phone number or to an email or some other way of following up without a website. But in the vast majority of the cases, the way that you're going to close the most sales is to move people from the social media venue to your website. And so the main way that you do that is by linking to your website from your social media conversation. And so what you really are asking yourself is, how do you track what they're doing? How do you know that someone has clicked on that link to come to your website? The other thing you have to ask yourself is, What are you trying to get them to do when they come to the website? If you joined us for last month's webinar, we talked at length about how you can measure internet marketing and how any kind of internet marketing, online marketing, digital marketing, whatever words you want to use for it, has to result in a conversion, something that's happening on your website that either lets them move along to the next thing offline, or it really has a shopping cart and they can buy something. So if you have a shopping cart, that's great. You can measure that. But you have to figure out all the other things that you might want your prospective customer to do. So what are you trying to get the visitor to the website to do? And that's what you're going to measure. You're going to measure how many of the people that came to your site actually did those things. And so you can look at how you might have 1,000 people coming to your site, and perhaps 10 of them did the thing that you were hoping for them to do, that conversion that we talked about. And so that's a 1% conversion rate. Then the question is, how do you increase your conversion rate? So how can you get more and more people to do the thing you want them to do? So you might double your conversion rate by making your site more persuasive, putting a better offer out there, changing your copy, changing the pictures. There's a million things you can do that might make your site twice as persuasive, which then doubles your conversions. You could also increase your traffic. So this is where social media can really come in. So you might not do anything to your website, but if you can get twice as many people to come, that's really terrific, because that's the thing that you really need to have happen with social media. So if you get more and more people in your community that you've reached out to and get them to come to the website, then if you double your traffic, you're also going to double your conversions. Best of all is if you do both. So if you double the number of people coming and you double your conversion rate, now you've quadrupled your conversions. So these are all the things that we went over at length last month. And what we focused on was how you can make these kinds of things happen. And what we're going to talk about today in the rest of this webinar is how you can get these things to happen from social media and how you can measure that the people are actually coming from social media. So with every kind of marketing, somebody is coming to your website. And so all of these different methods of marketing can all be tracked the same way, that if you understand where people are coming from, then you're able to check and see that this is how this tactic is performing. We know this many people are coming because they did this, that, or the other thing. And you can measure it, and you can say, well, we spent this much on it. This is how many sales we got from it. So that's what the return on investment was. And you can do that for social media as well, and that's what we want to talk about now. So how do you track your social media? How can you understand which places people came from when they come from your website? And the way you do it is with something called a tracking code. So a tracking code is a string of characters that you make up that identify a particular place that people are coming from. And so what you want to do is to let your website know that a visitor who lands on a particular page of your website came from a certain place. So they might have come from a blog, or they might have come from YouTube or from Twitter, and you want to know that. And so tracking codes are the way that you can capture that. You pick a different tracking code for everything you want to measure. And you can be as granular about this as you want to. If you would like to say, I'm picking a tracking code for YouTube, so every time someone comes from YouTube, I want to know it. Or you could actually say, I'm picking a different tracking code for each YouTube video, because I don't just want to know that they came from YouTube. I want to know which video they came from. You can be as granular as you want. You can say, I have one tracking code for all of YouTube. You could even say, I have one tracking code for all of social media if you want to. But once you do that, you can't get any more detailed than that. So you won't know particularly which videos they might have come from. It will be harder for you to figure that out. So how do you pass these tracking codes? So most of the time, it's pretty simple. So wherever you can use an HTML link, so in a blog, or in a message board, or in social bookmarking, so any of those kinds of sites where you can code the HTML anchor tag. You can see an example of it on the screen here, where it says the anchor tag, and it has href, which is the reference to the URL. And you can see that there's this tracking code that's in there, where it's ZKV2G. So that's interesting. So that tracking code is sitting there. And what's happening is that you just put that code in the URL, and when it comes to your site, your metric system is then going to figure out how it's going to track all of those visitors who came with that tracking code. So this is the simplest one. If you can code an anchor tag, an HTML link, then you can just stick the tracking code right there, and it'll work fine. But sometimes you can't do that. So suppose you have URL shorteners, right? And if you use Twitter, for example, you know about URL shorteners because they serve the purpose of making that very long link URL short enough so that it fits within the 140 characters. If there weren't URL shorteners, people wanted to put a link in their tweets would have very few characters to say anything about the link. And so that's the main reason people use them, but it has another purpose as well. It can also allow you to measure how many people have clicked on the link, which can be very, very helpful. And we show a couple of URL shorteners here on the screen, tinyURL and Bitly, but Google has come out with its own URL shortener. Twitter has a built-in URL shortener now. And so how do you use URL shorteners to track your social media return on investment? Well, the way you do that is you actually make your original link have the tracking code in it, and then you shorten that and apply the shortened link to your tweet. So those kinds of things work just fine, because what's going to happen is the short URL will be in the tweet, but then when someone clicks on it, Bitly or whatever URL shortener you're using will then expand it to that long URL that has the tracking code in it, and that will then get passed to your analytics system. So YouTube is a situation where there isn't any way for you to put a link in. There's no text, right? So how do you put a link in there? Well, Google offers something to do called a call to action overlay. Now, all the things we've talked about before this are free. This one actually costs money. You have to pay YouTube to have that call to action overlay. And so if you pay YouTube a little bit of money, then they'll put that on the screen, and then when people are watching your videos, they can click on that and go to your site. And so just like with the others, when you tell Google what URL you want to be in that call to action overlay, you can put your tracking code in it. So then what happens is then you have to think about how you're going to count all of these referrals and the conversions. So if you do not have an analytics system, so then put in Google Analytics on your website. If you do have one, then your analytics system is going to work just fine. Your web metric system, whether it's web trends, whether it's core metrics, doesn't matter what it is. They're all Omniture. They're all sorts of metric systems. All of them can accept these tracking codes. Because what happens is the tracking code comes in, and it denotes a unique event. And as we said before, it could be that all of social media you give one tracking code if that's the only level you want to operate on. But you can get very granular, and every particular YouTube video could have its own tracking code. So you can make it as granular as you want it to be, as long as you're willing to deal with keeping track of all those tracking codes. When someone comes to the site, the metric system sees that code. Sometimes it'll translate it to a new code that it uses for the rest of the visit to the site. Other times it'll just keep the same code. And then you can use the metric system to find out how many people came to the site who had that tracking code, which tells you where they came from. And then you can also track the web conversions that happen in that visit, which will then tell you how many conversions came from whatever the media is that you're trying to track. So we talked about this in the last webinar. How do you track offline conversions? So you need to have some way of tracking that online conversion to an offline conversion. So Sometimes you might do what car companies do, where they have you print something out and walk into the dealer with it, and then they mark down when they take your name and your phone number that you brought in that printout, so they know you came from the website. You could have them print coupons. You could put a special phone number on the site. All of these kinds of things are things that you're able to do so that it's not just for tracking online sales. You can track offline sales as well. You can also use CRM systems. So if you have a customer relationship management system that takes leads and then allows offline sales forces to go after clients and follow up with them, you could be using Salesforce.com. You could be using CRM systems that come from Oracle, from SAP. There are all sorts of popular ones out there. If you are a company that has that kind of thing, you can move the tracking code from the website to a CRM tracking code so that you can continue to follow the journey of that customer all the way through. So that's basically how you do it. And there's many other things that we can do as well. But one of the things we focused on was how do you get involved in those conversations that make sense. So if you were the car dealer and someone's trying to figure out how to finance a car, how do you get involved in that conversation? In order to do that, you need to know how you can be listening for those conversations. And that's what we're going to talk about on May 24th next month. So in our next webinar, that's what we're going to focus on, is how can you not just reach out to people who are already your fans and followers, but how can you listen for conversations out there from people who might not even know you, and then follow up and get involved to track your social media to a successful completion of a sale. So that's what I've got for today, Frank. I know that you've got some possibilities of some questions. I hope some people have been asking questions because I'm ready for them.
Well, good. They have, Mike, and thanks for that information. I'm sure our attendees have a much stronger idea now how to apply direct marketing principles to social media marketing. But as always, it's impossible to answer every question in just a few short minutes. I've got quite a few good ones that the audience has teed up for us, and like before I go into those, I'd like to remind our audience that it's not too late to ask your own question by typing into the questions box in your GoToWebinar controls. And our first question comes from Cindy, and she asked, in kind of paraphrasing here, what are the typical landmines or the typical kind of gotchas that people they overlook most commonly that really are important in this whole idea of ROI?
I think the biggest thing that they overlook is that they're not focused on the real nuts and bolts steps of how you connect one experience to another. And so they might go into it with this idea of, we're going to track return on investment for social media, but they haven't even tackled the question of how they understand return on investment for their website. And so they might be a company that sells offline. They don't even have a CRM system, so they don't even track return on investment for what the sales force is doing. And so one of the big gotchas is that you might walk into this with all sorts of good intentions about tracking return on investment for what you're doing, and it's not actually the piece that you're doing that's the big problem. The thing that's hard is that your company hasn't really done some of the other pieces of tracking return on investment for its web marketing or tracking return on investment for its offline sales. And so that's something I spend a lot of time helping companies with, because those things are actually so critical to be able to then track the return on investment for things like social media and other kinds of more advanced techniques.
So it's pretty common then for people to kind of put the social media marketing cart before the horse kind of mentality.
They do, and what happens is that they get frustrated because we can't track ROI for social media. And the reason that's happening, as I touched on in the presentation, is that when something new comes along, executives, CFOs, CEOs, they're always focused on, well, I don't know if we should do this because what's the return on investment? And that's a good question to ask, but the problem is that it gets asked for new things a lot more than it gets asked for old things. And so the same CFO who's saying, how do we do return on investment for social media, might not be the person who has ever asked the question, well, how do I know what the ROI is of my sales force? How do I know what the ROI is of the website? because they've just gotten to the point where they agree that this stuff is valuable, and they just decided, well, we have to do it. Everybody's doing it this way. Our customers are demanding it, so I guess we'll just go ahead and do those things, even though I don't know what the return on investment is. And then they forget about it. And then the next new thing comes along, and then all of a sudden they're asking that question again. And so what we have to do is to focus on making sure that we're applying the same rules to everything. So if we want to judge the return on investment of social media, we have to be willing to judge return on investment for websites, judge return on investment for sales forces, for telephone marketing, for all of the things we're doing. We have to be able to link a customer who came in from one to come through the others. And this is something direct marketers are very good at. They even have things called matchback systems in which they might say, well, they got a catalog, they called us up on the phone, and we talked to them for a while, and then a month later they bought something. And so we're going to attribute credit to different areas because they got hit with catalogs a couple of times, and they came to the website once, and so they're going to divide up the credit for that sale among all the touch points that that client had. And so those are things that if you focus on how direct marketing works, you have a chance of doing ROI, not just for social media, but for all the other kinds of marketing in your business.
Well, it's kind of interesting you bring that up, Mike, because we had another question from one of our attendees, kind of asking what are the kind of I guess a Cliff Notes kind of mentality as how do you approach C-level executives, and how do you what are some of the buzzwords, or how can you get their limited attention whenever you have it, to make sure that everything's going to go correctly and you're going to get the sign-offs in the right areas?
I think
magic bullets.
I think there are. I think this is the magic bullet. I think the magic bullet is to focus on making sure that what it is that you're trying to spend, both in terms of time and in terms of money, are things that they understand are supported by what the value will be. And so executives do not understand or care about social media. What they do care about is money. And so if you can help them to see how this is going to lead to more money, they're going to be very, very interested in what you're going to do. And so there's a couple of things I would say. First off, you want to try and figure out how to get in place these kinds of measurement systems so that you can come up with the value of what you're doing. But I would say that even if that's a very difficult proposition, and in some companies it is, I've spent months working with some companies trying to help them do these things, one thing to do is to start small. So if you're making a very, very small investment, then they're going to ask a lot fewer questions than if you say, would we have to do something really huge? And the great thing about social media is a lot of the times it's cheap. It doesn't cost very much to try. And so if you can show anything about what the value is, so maybe you can't show return on investment, but maybe you can show that you drove twice as much traffic to the website as a different tactic that people are spending money on. So you can say, well, we did all this email marketing and we got some sales, but here's the thing we did in social media, and we got even more people to come to the site. And so you might not be able to judge the whole way through to return on investment, but maybe you could at least show some kinds of measurements that show them that good things are happening. And if you're able to do that, then you might give them the stomach to invest in some of the things to make all the rest of the measurements happen.
Great. Well, we're at the 11:30 mark, and we want to always be respectful of everybody's time because we know how busy you are. There was one last thing I wanted to bring up. Very early on, one of our attendees, Steve, he didn't have a question. He had a statement that he actually already owned both of your books. So, he gets a special gold star. And, and the rest of the attendees you should be looking at the Search Engine Marketing Inc. and also Do It Wrong Quickly, because if there's ever an area to do it wrong quickly, it's on the internet. So once again, to be respectful of your time, we're going to wrap up, and I want to just say thanks to Mike for the great ideas, and thanks especially to our audience for your participation, your questions. That's what makes this thing run, and we hope that you got a ton of value from today's short time spent with us. If you have any questions that we didn't answer, you can email your questions to Eileen. That's EILEEN at MikeMoranGroup.com. And she'll be sure to get them to Mike for the answer. Now, remember, later this week, we'll send you a link that has a recording of the webinar so you can listen again and share with others. And while we have you for these last few seconds, we'd also like to invite you to mark your calendars for the next Biznology webinar, which is entitled Listening to Your Customers in Social Media. and that's scheduled for 11 a.m. Eastern Time on May 24th. So thank you again, everybody. We really appreciate your time, and please let us know. Send emails to Eileen. Let us know what you think of the series and of the webinars, and what we can do to help you out further in the future. Thanks for everybody's time. We hope you have a great week.